Wahhabism is completely different. Wahhabism is the ideology that is assisting Israeli geopolitical strategy in the Middle East and ultimately the entire Ummah. It's Wahhabism that tells Muslims that you have to constantly be infighting. We have to have constant civil war, because unless every Muslim accepts the Tawheed, scare quotes, Tawheed, of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, they're not true Muslims. They're actually kafir mushriks, and they're a worse problem than Christians and Jews and Hindus. So we have to eliminate those non-Wahhabi Muslims, quote-unquote Muslims. They're actually mushrik, murtads. We have to eliminate them before we can address anything else. What does this do? Causes nonstop civil war, nonstop infighting, nonstop self-destruction, where in 75 years of occupation by the Zionist state, we're still debating, oh, should the Muslims unite? Should the Muslims get together and try to repel this genocide that's expanding across the Middle East and all of these countries, one by one, whether it is Iraq, whether it is Somalia, whether it is Sudan, whether it is Libya, one by one being taken out. Like, maybe we should unite, guys. Like 75 years later, we're still debating this. Why? It's because of Wahhabism. It's because of Wahhabism. Sunnism. What is the official title of Sunnism? Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. What does Jama'ah mean? What does Jama'ah mean? Means you're a group, like you're a group, and the scholars of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah have determined that we are not like the Khawarij. We are not going to elevate every single difference into something that is going to cause us to fight each other or to consider each other to be kafir. We're not going to do that like the Khawarij did. We're different from the Khawarij. We believe in the Jama'ah. We tolerate a certain level of differences. And that's how we can be Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. That's why we can have multiple madhahib, the madhabs. Did you know that in certain parts of Islamic history that the madhahib were takfiring each other? Did you know that the Hanbalis were takfiring the Hanafis, and sometimes vice versa? Between schools of fiqh, they were takfiring each other, they were fighting each other. Did you know that that's a part of Islamic history? If you want to create nonstop civil war and internal conflict in the Ummah in the year 2025, you will say that, hey, actually, we should be fighting just like the Hanbalis were fighting the Hanafis and takfiring the Hanafis. You can cherry pick these periods of Islamic history where there was a fitna, where there was conflict. You can cherry pick even the fitna that affected the Sahaba, even the fitna, the first fitna, the second fitna that affected the Sahaba, the fitna that affected the Salaf. You can find periods of fitna where there was civil war between the Muslims, and you can point to those and say, this is what Islam is about. It's about civil war. It's about a purity of creed. And anyone who is not on this exact aqidah, we are going to fight them even worse than we're going to fight the kuffar. And this is the Wahhabi trick that, unfortunately, many Sunnis and Salafis, they fall for this because they have a very superficial understanding of Islamic history. You can always find periods of Islamic history where Muslims are takfiring each other and fighting each other. That's called cherry picking. There are other periods of history, and in fact, that's the majority of Islamic history, where these groups, despite being distinct groups, and despite having differences in aqidah, they were not fighting each other. In fact, they were living together harmoniously, and they were allied together. You can also find those periods of history. The Wahhabis, because they are using this weapon of aqidah to disunite the Muslims, to cause division and constant civil war, often for a political purpose that aligns with the Israeli Zionist purpose, they will cherry pick times of fitan, times of conflict, times of takfir, and say, this, see, there's precedent for the takfir that we're doing now. There's precedent. Ahlul Hadith were doing this takfir. Ahlul Hadith were doing this takfir in the 9th century. And, oh, by the way, don't you know about the Fatimids and how they were backstabbing the Ummah? Well, that's exactly what Iran is today. Iran is exactly like the Fatimids. They won't point to the other periods of Islamic history. They won't point to the other regions within Islamic history where Shia and Sunni considered each other deviant or even takfired each other, but they were not able to live together. What about those periods? They'll ignore that. They'll ignore that, and they will actively conceal that. This is a psyop. This is a deception. Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah has made has developed this level of tolerance for the sake of preventing constant civil war. It's a survival mechanism, and it's more critical than ever. It is more critical than ever. That's why when I see a moron retard like Jake Brancatella and Fareed and Adnan and Abdul and whatever other Wahhabi moron inflaming sectarianism at this moment, this existential crisis moment, then I'm going to be very opposed to that. And I'm going to dedicate a lot of time to completely eviscerating, annihilating, destroying their retarded, their stupid, deviant ideology. Spending months to release a 3.5-hour documentary to completely eviscerate their stupid, deviant ideology and point to this is the source of our problems today. This is the source right here.